The UK's rental tribunal system is about to face its biggest crisis in history, and the government has no idea what's coming. In just months, we could see tribunal waiting times explode from 14 weeks to over 18 months, leaving landlords hemorrhaging thousands in lost rent while tenants exploit a massive legal loophole. Scotland already witnessed a staggering 1,180% surge in tribunal cases after implementing similar rules, jumping from just 106 cases to 1,250 in 2 years. And that's in a country with only a fraction of England's rental market. What's about to hit England when the Renters' Rights Act goes live will make Scotland's experience look like a minor tremor before an earthquake. If you're watching Property Reporter to stay ahead of the UK's economic shifts, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe now, because what's unfolding in the rental market will reshape Britain's entire housing economy, and you need to understand what's coming before it hits the brutal reality that nobody's talking about. Once May 1st arrives, every single tenant in England gains the power to contest any rent increase through a tribunal, and while they wait for their hearing, they don't have to pay a penny more in rent. Think about that for a moment. Your landlord wants to raise your rent by £100 a month to match market rates, but you file a tribunal challenge. Even if the increase is completely justified, even if rents in your area have gone up £200, you get to keep paying your old rate while the overwhelmed tribunal system processes your case. With current delays at 14 weeks and about to get much worse, that's potentially £400 saved already. But the real kicker? When the tribunal eventually rules in the landlord's favour, which statistics suggest they often will, that backdated rent simply vanishes. The landlord can't claim it. It's written off completely. The mathematics here are devastating for property owners. A landlord needing to increase rent by £100 monthly to cover rising mortgage rates, insurance premiums and new compliance costs could lose £1,200 or more waiting for a tribunal decision. And that's assuming the current 14-week timeline, which is about to become a fantasy. Industry insiders are already warning that without massive investment in tribunal infrastructure, which the government hasn't even discussed, we're looking at delays stretching to 12, even 18 months. For landlords already squeezed by interest rates that have more than doubled since 2021, this could be the final nail in the coffin. But what happened in Scotland should terrify everyone involved in England's rental market. When Scotland introduced similar tenant protections, tribunal cases didn't just increase, they exploded. From 106 cases in 2022 to 1,250 by 2024, and that's in a market with roughly 350,000 private rental properties. England has 4.6 million. If we see the same proportional increase, we're talking about going from perhaps a few hundred tribunal cases annually to potentially 16,000 or more. The tribunal system isn't equipped for a 10% increase, let alone a 1,000% surge. Former tribunal officers speaking off the record describe the current system as already stretched to breaking point. One veteran administrator called the incoming changes, and I quote, "bureaucratic suicide." Meanwhile, landlords aren't waiting around to become casualties. Letting agents across the country are reporting something unprecedented. In Hastings, one major agency reports they've never processed so many Section 21 eviction notices. Birmingham agents describe it as an avalanche. Manchester's largest letting firm has hired additional staff just to handle the paperwork. These are the no-fault evictions that disappear on May 1st, and landlords are racing to serve them while they still can. The human cost is staggering. Thousands of families who've never missed a rent payment, never caused problems, are receiving eviction notices simply because their landlords want out before the new rules trap them in unprofitable tenancies. The strategic game theory at play here is actually fascinating and terrifying in equal measure. Once May 1st hits, rational tenant behaviour dictates contesting every single rent increase, regardless of fairness. Why wouldn't you? There's zero downside. You can't be evicted for challenging a rent increase. You save money during the lengthy tribunal wait. If you lose, you're no worse off than if you'd accepted the increase initially. If you win, you've potentially saved thousands. Even if your relationship with your landlord deteriorates, So what? Under the new rules, they can't evict you without proving specific grounds like rent arrears or property damage. You're essentially untouchable as long as you pay your current rent and don't break your tenancy agreement. This creates a prisoner's dilemma scenario where even tenants who have good relationships with fair landlords are incentivized to challenge rent increases. Because if other tenants are doing it and saving money, why should you be the one paying more? One property investment analyst described it as a race to the bottom where everybody loses eventually. The tribunal system becomes weaponized, not to address genuine unfairness, but as a financial strategy. And the most vulnerable landlords, the accidental landlords, the elderly couples renting out one property for retirement income, they're the ones who'll be crushed first. The economic ripple effects will be catastrophic and far-reaching. When tribunal delays hit 12 months, which multiple sources suggest is conservative, the entire rental market pricing mechanism breaks down. Landlords can't adjust rents to match inflation, maintenance costs, or mortgage rate changes. Properties become financially unviable. More landlords exit the market, reducing supply. Corporate investors with deep pockets buy up distressed properties at discount prices. Rents eventually skyrocket due to supply shortage. But only large institutional landlords can weather the tribunal delays to implement increases. The mom-and-pop landlords who often provide the most affordable housing? They're gone. Government data when you can actually find it, because mysteriously they claim comprehensive tribunal statistics don't exist. Suggests the current system handles roughly 15,000 to 20,000 housing-related cases annually across all categories. Adding potentially 16,000 rent increase challenges would nearly double the caseload overnight. Without hiring hundreds of new tribunal officers, which would cost millions the government claims it doesn't have, the system simply cannot function. Legal experts are already warning about potential human rights challenges if tribunals can't hear cases within reasonable timeframes. The European Convention on Human Rights, still applicable despite Brexit, guarantees access to justice within reasonable time. 18-month delays could trigger massive compensation claims against the government. What is particularly insidious is how this crisis will accelerate the very problems the Renters' Rights Act supposedly addresses. Housing inequality? It'll worsen as only wealthy corporate landlords survive. Tenant security? It'll decrease as desperate landlords find creative ways to force tenants out before May 1st. Affordable housing? It'll vanish as small landlords exit and large corporations monopolise the market. The bitter irony is that the tenants this legislation aims to protect will ultimately suffer most. Sure, they might save a few £100 challenging a rent increase, but when they eventually need to move, they'll find a market with fewer properties, higher rents, and corporate landlords who've figured out exactly how to navigate the tribunal system to their advantage. Regional variations will create housing apartheid across England. London, already in crisis with average rents exceeding £2,000 monthly, will see the wealthy areas become exclusive enclaves while lower-income areas face complete landlord abandonment. Northern cities might initially seem better off, but as southern landlords flood these markets seeking better returns, local rents will spike. Coastal areas popular with retirees who often rent out properties for income will see mass sell-offs, destroying local rental markets. University towns face particular chaos as student landlords, already dealing with complex regulations, simply give up. We're potentially looking at a student accommodation crisis by September 2025 that could force universities to emergency build accommodation, or risk losing thousands of students who simply can't find housing. The smart money is already moving. Property investment firms are raising massive funds to buy distressed rental properties from exiting landlords. They're betting on a consolidated market where fewer, larger players can dominate pricing. These aren't charitable organisations. They're expecting 15 to 20% annual returns once the market stabilises under their control. One fund manager, speaking anonymously, called it the greatest wealth transfer from small to large property owners in British history. They're particularly targeting properties in areas with strong rental demand, but lots of small landlords. Birmingham, Manchester, Leeds, Bristol, these cities will see ownership concentration that would have been unthinkable 5 years ago. But here's what should really worry everyone. The government's response to this predictable crisis has been silence. No additional tribunal funding announced. No emergency measures prepared. No recognition that Scotland's experience provides a clear warning. It's almost as if they're deliberately ignoring the obvious consequences, leading some analysts to suggest this might be intentional. Create a crisis that forces small landlords out, allowing larger, more regulatable corporate entities to dominate. It's conspiracy theory territory, except the evidence keeps mounting. Treasury documents leaked last month mentioned potential stamp duty revenues from increased property sales as landlords exit. They're literally budgeting for the exodus they claim won't happen. The human stories behind these statistics are heartbreaking. Elderly landlords who've rented to the same families for decades, charging below market rates out of decency, now forced to evict because they can't risk tribunal delays when they're living on fixed incomes. Young families who've saved for years to buy a rental property as their pension plan, watching their financial future evaporate. Tenants who've built lives in communities, established their children in local schools, suddenly facing eviction through no fault of their own. This isn't market evolution, it's market destruction. And the most vulnerable on both sides, the elderly landlords and the low-income tenants, they're the ones being crushed. The downstream economic impacts extend far beyond housing. Banks holding buy-to-let mortgages face potential crisis if mass landlord exits trigger property price drops in certain areas. Insurance companies may refuse coverage for rental properties in tribunal-heavy regions. Property maintenance companies will lose thousands of customers as landlords exit. Estate agents specialising in lettings face potential collapse. The economic multiplier effect could eliminate tens of thousands of jobs. Yet government impact assessments, when pressed, admit they haven't modelled these scenarios. They're walking blindfolded toward a cliff, dragging the entire rental economy with them. International investors are watching with mixture of horror and opportunity. American property funds, experienced in markets with similar tribunal systems, are positioning themselves to capitalise. They know how to game these systems, how to structure rents and increases to minimise challenges, how to use legal resources to overwhelm individual tenants in tribunals. The Americanisation of Britain's rental market isn't coming, it's here. And unlike British landlords who often maintain some personal connection to tenants, these funds see tenants as data points on spreadsheets. Every protection the government introduces becomes another variable to optimise around. The result? A rental market that's technically compliant but utterly soulless. For tenants thinking this is their moment of triumph, reality will hit hard. Yes, you might delay a rent increase for a year. But when your landlord sells to a corporation that uses algorithmic pricing, professional legal teams, and systematic lease engineering to extract maximum profit while staying just within the law, you'll long for the days of dealing with Derek from down the road who at least knew your name. The corporate landlords coming to dominate this market have turned tenant management into a science. They know exactly how much they can increase rent without triggering tribunals. They know how to structure leases to make challenges nearly impossible. They know how to use the threat of legal action to discourage tribunal applications. The timeline for this catastrophe is remarkably precise. May 1st, the new rules activate. By June, the first wave of tribunal applications floods in. July sees delays extending from weeks to months. August brings the first media stories of landlords going bankrupt waiting for tribunal decisions. September unleashes chaos in university towns as student housing evaporates. October sees emergency government meetings as the crisis becomes undeniable. November brings hasty, ill-conceived emergency measures that make things worse. December sees property funds announcing record acquisitions of distressed rental properties. January 2026 marks the point where everyone realises the damage is irreversible. By then, the transformation of Britain's rental market from diverse ownership to corporate oligopoly is complete. Local authorities, already struggling with homelessness, face impossible pressure. When hundreds of families simultaneously receive Section 21 notices, where do they go? Council housing waiting lists already stretch years. Temporary accommodation costs councils thousands per family monthly. Budget projections for 2025 to 26 don't account for potentially doubling or tripling homelessness services demand. Some councils privately admit they're expecting bankruptcy. Others are secretly lobbying for emergency powers to requisition empty properties. The social fabric of entire communities risks tearing apart. When long-term tenants are forced out en masse, local schools lose students, shops lose customers, communities lose cohesion. The government's levelling up agenda becomes laughable when entire regions face rental market collapse. The investment opportunities in this chaos are enormous for those with capital and stomach for risk. Distressed property sales will create once-in-a-generation buying opportunities. Companies specialising in tribunal representation will see explosive growth. Property management firms that can navigate the new landscape will thrive. Legal tech startups automating tribunal applications could capture huge market share. But these opportunities come at the cost of human misery. Every discounted property purchase represents a family's shattered retirement plan. Every tribunal delay company profit represents a tenant-landlord relationship destroyed. The financialization of housing misery reaches new depths. Perhaps most tragically, solutions exist but require political courage nobody seems to possess. Gradual implementation with proper tribunal funding could work. Rent increase mediation before formal tribunals could reduce caseload. Regional variations, acknowledging different market conditions could help. Professional landlord registration with different rules than accidental landlords makes sense. But these nuanced approaches don't generate headlines or win votes. Instead, we get blunt instruments smashing complex systems, creating chaos that benefits only those positioned to profit from destruction. The question isn't whether this crisis will happen, it's whether anyone in power cares enough to prevent it. The generational impact stretches decades into the future. Young people already priced out of buying homes now face a rental market dominated by corporations with no incentive to keep rents affordable. The British dream of property ownership becomes even more distant. Social mobility grinds to a halt when moving for better jobs means navigating a dysfunctional rental market. The basic stability necessary for family formation, career development, and community building evaporates. We're witnessing the controlled demolition of a housing system that, while flawed, at least functioned. What replaces it serves only those with enough wealth to profit from others' desperation. The international competitiveness of British cities suffers when skilled workers can't find decent housing. Companies struggle recruiting talent who face either eye-watering rents or soul-destroying commutes. The productivity puzzle economists obsess over has a simple answer. Workers spending increasing time and money on housing basics can't contribute effectively to economic growth. Yet policymakers seem incapable of connecting these dots. They treat housing as isolated from broader economic health, missing how rental market dysfunction ripples through everything from consumer spending to mental health services demand. Britain stands at a crossroads that will define its housing future for generations. May 1st, 2025 isn't just another regulatory deadline. It's the date when theoretical policy meets brutal reality, when thousands of tenants simultaneously discover they can weaponize tribunals, when landlords realise the game has fundamentally changed, when the tribunal system faces pressure it cannot possibly handle. The Scottish experience isn't a warning, it's a preview of catastrophe. England's rental market, 13 times larger, faces proportionally greater chaos. The government's failure to prepare isn't oversight, it's negligence bordering on malice. For anyone watching this unfold, whether tenant, landlord, or simply concerned citizen, the message is clear. The rental market you've known is ending. What emerges from the rubble depends on whether enough people recognise the crisis before it's too late. The tribunal tsunami approaching isn't natural disaster, but man-made catastrophe. Predictable, preventable, but probably inevitable given the political paralysis gripping Westminster. When historians write about the Great British Housing Crisis of the 2020s, May 1st, 2025, will mark the moment everything changed. The question is whether you'll be prepared for what comes next, or simply another casualty of a system that prioritised headlines over homes, politics over people, and ideology over the basic human need for stable, affordable shelter.